The world does not fear the violent man. It fears the authentic man, the one who doesn't need to feign virtue to be respected, nor hide his shadow to be loved. Carl Jung would say this is the kind of man the collective unconscious tries to eliminate, because his mere presence is a threat to the order of those who live by appearances. He doesn't need to shout, he doesn't need to prove himself, he doesn't need to follow the rules. And that's precisely why the system tries to silence him. From an early age, you were taught to be nice, cooperative, adaptable, but no one warned you that this was just a fancy way to amputate your soul. Society doesn't want conscious men, it wants obedient actors. It wants the smile that masks fatigue, the okay said through gritted teeth, the conformity disguised as poise, because a man who stops pretending stops being predictable. And when a human being stops being predictable, they become dangerous. Dangerous not because it destroys, but because it sees. And seeing is the first step to freeing yourself. That's why the man who refuses to pretend isn't a rebel, he's awakened. He challenges the order not out of anger, but out of lucidity. And this lucidity isolates him, marks him, turns him into a mirror. Others avoid him, but they can't ignore him. He carries the restlessness of someone who has realized that true exile isn't being rejected. It's living too accepted in a place where no one is truly. This video is about this man, the man who grew tired of acting, who traded approval for presence, and who discovered in the ruins of conformity the freedom that the whole world fears. And you? Can you imagine what happens when someone refuses to pretend? It's curious how the world insists on dividing people into those who want a lot and those who do little, as if ambition and laziness were polar opposites and irreconcilable. Carl Jung would say, this is just another duality created by the ego, an attempt to fit the soul into boxes it would never fit. The lazy ambitious is the one who dreams big but seems in no hurry. Society calls him indecisive, when in reality he is simply rejecting the blind rush of the collective persona. He doesn't want to rush, he wants to understand. While the world runs in circles, he silently observes the gears turning, and perhaps that's why he seems lazy. But it is in this apparent idleness that spirituality manifests itself, in the space between impulse and action, where intention is organized before it is born. It's a kind of shadow work disguised as rest. There's a collective misunderstanding of what action is. People confuse movement with progress, effort with purpose. The lazy ambitious doesn't move to appear productive. He moves when the sense calls. Jung would explain that he's in touch with creative archetypes, those who act subterranean, incubating ideas until they're ripe. He's the kind of person who appears to be standing still, but is actually processing the invisible. When he decides to act, he does in a day what others would do in months, because his action comes from clarity, not haste. This is the paradox. He appears slow, but he's in tune with an internal rhythm more precise than any chronometer. In practice, this can be seen in the artist who takes months to paint, but when he does, he creates something timeless. Or in the entrepreneur who spends days reflecting before making a decision, while others rush to open businesses doomed to failure. The lazy ambitious understands that time spent thinking is not wasted time, it is the laboratory of the soul. He perceives the ego trying to rush the process and silences it with strategic patience. It's the same principle Jung observed in the cycles of individuation, first withdrawal, then conscious action. And ironically, it is precisely this apparent ritual of slowness that makes him more effective than those who act without direction. But there's enormous pressure to prove worth. Now, the modern persona, fueled by metrics and external validation, doesn't tolerate productive silence. When someone says, "I'm waiting for the right moment," they're immediately accused of procrastinating. However, within the psyche, There's a stark difference between procrastinating and preparing. The former avoids discomfort, the latter listens to the call. This is where the lazy ambitious excels. They know how to wait without losing their way. They're not afraid of being misunderstood because they know that those who need to appear busy are still trapped in the shadow of the fear of not being enough. They, on the contrary, act when the self calls them, not when the algorithm demands it. This kind of mindset is disturbing because it challenges the system. The lazy ambitious lives in a paradox. He wants more from life, but refuses to pay the price of haste. And this refusal is what makes him dangerous for a society obsessed with movement. While everyone else seeks more tasks, he seeks greater awareness. He understands that true ambition is not about conquering the external world, but about conquering the internal world. And this is precisely where the next contradiction begins to emerge. The modern myth of habitual success, the cycle of repetition disguised as victory. The modern world has transformed success into a mechanical ritual, almost a cult of repetition. Waking up early, working hard, collecting achievements, and in the end, feeling the same emptiness as before. Carl Jung would call this identification with the persona, living to maintain a socially approved but spiritually dead image. The fallacy of habitual success is simple. The more one repeats what works for others, the further one moves away from what would truly work for oneself. It's the victory of the ego disguised as progress. The individual believes they are evolving, but they are merely becoming a more efficient copy of the same mold. And the irony is that the more they try to appear successful, the more they disconnect from the self, the source of all authenticity and creation. Success, when left unreflected, becomes a prison. How many people do you know who have achieved everything they wanted, career, status, comfort, and still wake up with an invisible weight on their shoulders? Shadow work reveals that behind many goals lies fear, fear of failure, of disappointment, of being forgotten. Habit, in this case, is a psychic defense, repeating the familiar to avoid facing the unknown. This is why Jung said that most people don't live lives, they just execute patterns. Habitual success is the ego trying to maintain control, while the soul craves risk, silence, and meaning. To understand this trap, just observe the cycle. The individual wakes up, runs, produces, earns, publishes, and sleeps. Repeat. And each repetition comes with an increasingly weaker sense of accomplishment. It's as if life were an emotional conveyor belt driven by dopamine and approval. In this context, spirituality is not a luxury, it's survival. Breaking the habit is the first act of courage. The individual needs to interrupt the automatism and ask themselves, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's a simple question, but almost no one can bear it because it disarms the ego and exposes the emptiness of routine. But it is precisely this question that opens the portal to individuation. Ancient archetypes remind us of this. Before becoming wise, the hero must abandon the comfort of the familiar, the castle, the village, the routine. He must enter the forest where there are no marked trails. The same goes for anyone who wants real success. If everything in your life is predictable, you're not growing. You're just repeating the same lesson, hoping for a new outcome. Transformation begins when habit loses its meaning and purpose returns to guide you. And this process is uncomfortable because the ego struggles to survive, trying to convince you that stable is the same as safe. But Jung said, nothing changes until it becomes conscious. True success isn't what impresses, it's what expands. It's not habit that protects you, it's intention that moves you. The lazy ambitious, when awakened, understands that doing less with presence is worth more than doing much with absence. And that's where the power of silent intention is born, that almost invisible impulse that transforms without needing to prove anything. Because when movement comes from the soul and not from routine, every gesture becomes alchemy. And it's precisely this kind of power that the world has yet to learn to understand. There's something profoundly magnetic about those who don't need to announce what they're going to do. Silent intention is a force the ego doesn't understand, but the unconscious recognizes. Carl Jung said that real power lies not in shouting, but in the invisible direction of energy. While many try to convince the world of their importance, a few move the world in silence. These few understood that spirituality and action are not opposites. They are complementary rhythms of the same inner melody. When intention is pure, the universe seems to conspire not by magic, but by coherence. Everything around responds to inner clarity. And the curious thing is that the quieter the intention, the louder the results. The common mind seeks control through exposure. It wants likes, applause, and immediate recognition, as if external validation were the seal of authenticity. But the mature soul understands that true movement happens behind the scenes. The magician archetype, so present in Jung's works, symbolizes precisely this, the one who transforms reality through awareness, not fanfare. They observe, study, internalize, and only then act. Their strength lies in precision, not haste. This is why some seem lucky. In truth, they have simply learned to align intention and action before acting. Their silence is discipline, not weakness. In practice, silent intention can be applied to any area of life. When someone wants to change careers, for example, the mistake is to announce it before preparing the groundwork. Talking too much drains psychic energy. The correct approach is to create the habit of acting first and speaking later. Read, study, plan, and let the results speak for themselves. The same goes for love. When one person changes their internal vibration, the other feels it, even without words. Jung called this synchronicity, the external world reflecting the internal transformation. It's the ego that seeks explanation. The soul simply observes the coherence emerging. And there's an indescribable peace in this way of living. When intention is silent, mental noise dissolves. You no longer need to justify yourself, because your presence already communicates everything. The persona loses ground, and the self begins to radiate. This energy isn't forced, it's cultivated. Therefore, simple practices like meditation, journaling, or solitary walks aren't self-help, they're alignment strategies. They strengthen the inner field, making it impenetrable to doubt and judgment. From there, success stops being a race and becomes a consequence. True power is invisible precisely because it doesn't need to be proven. But this kind of power is frightening. Society fears the man who doesn't need to shout to be heard, the individual who, without showing off, wields influence. He's not aggressive, he's focused. He doesn't seek admirers, he commands respect. And it's precisely this collective fear of silent power that shapes the next dilemma. Society's fear of those who won't submit to its haste or its noise. Society fears the uncontrollable, not because they're dangerous, but because they're free. Carl Jung explained that the collective unconscious is organized around predictability. Anything that deviates from the norm is seen as a threat. The lazy ambitious, the one who doesn't follow the frenetic pace of the herd, becomes an uncomfortable mirror. Their tranquility unmasks the rush of others. Their calm betrays their anxiety. It's curious. The world celebrates success, but distrusts those who achieve it without appearing to put in the effort. The spirituality of this profile lies precisely there. They don't need to prove their worth, because they find it within themselves. And nothing is more dangerous in the eyes of the system than someone who doesn't depend on approval. This collective fear manifests itself subtly. Those who are different are labeled lazy, arrogant, strange, antisocial. These are labels the social ego uses to neutralize what it doesn't understand. The same happened with historical figures who refused to follow the script. From Socrates to Jung, all were considered disruptive before being understood. The problem isn't the profile itself, but what it represents: autonomy. And autonomy is the opposite of the emotional obedience that sustains modern society. When someone frees themselves from the need to be accepted, they break the symbolic control that fear exerts over collective behavior. This is why this type of person provokes, even unintentionally. Consider the workplace, for example. An employee who questions the meaning of certain tasks is immediately seen as difficult. A student who refuses to memorize without understanding is called distracted. A creative person who takes a long time to act is accused of being unfocused. Society doesn't value depth, it values conformity. A person who thinks differently awakens discomfort because it reminds others that there's something wrong with their automatic way of living. Jung would say it's the collective shadow reacting, the group's unconscious trying to expel what threatens to reveal its own superficiality. And it is precisely in this struggle that individuation is born, the process of becoming whole, even under the hostile gaze of the world. There's also the quieter fear that this type of man will prove the system wrong, because if someone can thrive by being authentic, centered, and slow, the entire structure based on haste, hierarchy, and status begins to crumble. The archetype of the wise rebel emerges, one who doesn't fight the system, but transcends it by not depending on it. His weapon is coherence, his shield is silence. He doesn't need to shout to be heard, he simply needs to exist in a state of presence. And this presence is disturbing because it reveals that power isn't synonymous with noise, but with depth. Therefore, those who refuse to pretend are seen as threats, even if they live in peace. They remind society of what it has forgotten. That haste is not synonymous with evolution, and that obedience is not a virtue. This man deconstructs the collective persona and, in doing so, awakens in many the rage of seeing their own shadow reflected. Social fear is merely a reflection of individual repression, and it is at this point that the essential question arises. If authenticity is so dangerous, what is its role in the ambitious drive that drives human beings? Ambition without authenticity is just vanity disguised as purpose. Carl Jung said that the ego seeks power, but the self seeks expression, and this is the difference between the man who conquers out of fear and the one who creates out of meaning. The ambitious impulse is natural. It is the spark that moves life forward. But when it arises solely from the desire to prove something, it becomes destructive. Authenticity is the filter that purifies this energy, transforming the desire to dominate into the will to achieve. It is the point at which spirituality meets action. The authentic man does not seek to defeat others, he seeks to manifest who he is. And this difference changes everything. The former competes, the latter creates. The problem is that the modern world has taught us to confuse authenticity with performative rebellion. People believe that being authentic means being different, when in fact it's being true. The persona wants to be seen, the self wants to be whole. The authentic person doesn't need to prove anything. Their energy speaks for them. They can be silent, yet dominate a room. They are the archetype of the inner king, one who rules their own kingdom before attempting to rule the world. This kind of power isn't born from external effort, but from the integration of the shadow, from the shadow work that makes them recognize and accept their own opposites. Authenticity is therefore a form of emotional wisdom. In practice, being authentic means acting according to your own truth, even when no one understands. It means turning down a job that pays well, but consumes your soul. It means ending a relationship that provides security, but stifles growth. It means choosing silence over validation. And paradoxically, these choices ultimately lead to success, not because the world rewards authenticity, but because the universe responds to coherence. When the soul is aligned, the right doors open. Jung would call this synchronicity, but those who have lived it understand. Chance is actually the self-conspiring. This alignment has a curious effect on ambition. When a person is authentic, the desire to have transforms into a desire to be. They begin to realize that the impulse that drove them was not for power, but for expansion. They don't want to accumulate achievements. They want to become more whole. This is why true success has a sense of calm, not euphoria. The ego vibrates in excitement. The self vibrates in serenity. The authentic person finds fulfillment in silence because they understand that their mission is internal. And the more they expand within, the more natural their influence on the world becomes. But the system doesn't understand this. It expects a kind of ambition that submits, not transcends. The authentic person is dangerous because their motivation cannot be manipulated. They don't run out of fear, they run out of calling. And this makes them unpredictable, uncontrollable, free. This inner freedom is what the system fears most. And it is also what triggers its reaction, because when a human being chooses to live according to their own rhythm, the system must react. And this is what the next point reveals, how the world responds to those who dare to be different. The system doesn't fear the incompetent, it fears the independent. Carl Jung said that whatever the collective doesn't understand, it tries to correct, punish, or ridicule. The different person, the one who thinks with his own head and feels with his own soul, is seen as an anomaly in the social organism. He shatters the illusion of uniformity that sustains the herd. The system needs predictability to survive, and individuality is a virus within this structure. This person's spirituality makes him dangerous because he cannot be bought with promises or controlled with fear. He sees beyond the collective persona, beyond the theater of appearances, and this is enough to be considered subversive, even in silence. Historically, everyone who is different has been crucified in some way, literally or symbolically. Christ, Socrates, Jung, Galileo all dared to think outside the box. The system reacts first with scorn, then with resistance, and finally with imitation. At first it calls them crazy. Then it tries to discredit them. When it fails, it transforms them into icons, removing the danger of living authenticity and transforming them into statues. This is how the system neutralizes the different. By canonizing them, domesticating their rebelliousness, taking away their power to inspire action. The real challenge is not to be different, but to remain different without being swallowed up by the admiration or hatred of others. This reaction also manifests itself in small things. At work, the different person is the one who proposes new ideas and is met with suspicious looks. In the family, it's the one who questions traditions and is accused of thinking they know too much. In relationships, it's the one who prefers silence to drama and therefore is labeled cold. Urdu, the system doesn't know how to deal with what can't be explained. It wants everyone to speak the same language, have the same dreams, and fear the same things. And when someone breaks this artificial synchrony, the reaction is immediate: exclusion or criticism. The system reacts like a body trying to expel a transplanted organ. But there's a profound irony in all this. The more the system tries to reject what's different, the weaker it becomes. Because it's precisely this kind of person who brings innovation, art, science, and living spirituality. What's different is the collective unconscious trying to actualize itself. Jung called this the transcendent function, the energy that arises when opposites clash and something new is born. The system, by resisting, is only delaying its own evolution. And that's why the man who refuses to pretend needs courage, not the noisy courage of vanity, but the quiet courage of integrity. He knows he will be misunderstood, but he understands that the price of authenticity is the toll of freedom. And it is in this clash between the individual and the collective that something deeper begins to emerge. The difference is not just external, it is internal. The ego struggles to maintain control, the shadow tries to be seen, and the self observes everything in silence. The different is, in truth, the one who has learned to listen to this battle within themselves and still remain steadfast. The system tries to mold them from the outside, but they have already freed themselves from within. And it is here that the next point reveals itself. The intimate relationship between the ego, the shadow, and true desire. The invisible triangle that defines whether someone will be a slave to the system or a master of themselves. Within every human being lies a silent stage where three forces vie for prominence: the ego, the shadow, and true desire. Carl Jung saw the ego as the actor who believes he's the script. He interprets, but forgets he's not the author. The shadow is the rejected side, the one the actor tries to hide from the spotlight. And true desire is the impulse of the self trying to manifest itself, even if consciousness isn't yet ready to hear it. When the ego over-identifies with the persona, this social mask that demands admiration, it begins to desire what it doesn't want, love what it doesn't feel, and pursue what it doesn't need. This is where humankind loses its way, when its desire ceases to be its own. True desire doesn't shout, it whispers. It's that deep restlessness that isn't silenced by praise or satisfied by victories. It's the call to something the ego doesn't understand, but which the soul immediately recognizes. The shadow, in turn, is the portal between the two, the field where the false dissolves and the authentic emerges. In shadow work, the individual discovers that many of their desires are actually attempts to compensate for old wounds. They don't want power, they want respect. They don't want fame, they want to be seen. They don't want money, they want freedom. But the ego, fearing vulnerability, translates these longings into more socially acceptable goals. Thus, desire disguises itself as ambition. The great mistake is to fight the ego. It is not the villain, merely the psyche's confused messenger. The real work is not to eliminate it, but to educate it. Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this darkness is precisely the shadow, the reservoir of all that has been denied, repressed, and forgotten. When man dares to look into it, he discovers that there lie his purest passions, his repressed creativity, his stifled courage. True desire is born from this reconciliation. It is the point at which the ego ceases to be a servant of the image and becomes a servant of the soul. In practice, this integration manifests itself in small actions. The person who once sought approval begins to act in silence. The one who ran out of fear begins to walk with purpose. He stops comparing himself because he realizes that comparison is the language of the ego, not the self. The shadow, once an enemy, becomes a compass. It points out what needs to be healed and what needs to be accepted. It is in this process that true desire becomes a driving force, no longer to impress, but to express. The external world ceases to be a stage and becomes a mirror, that which reflects the individual's true self. And it is precisely this internal transformation that the system fears most. A person who understands their own impulses cannot be manipulated by manufactured desires. They are no longer swayed by propaganda, comparisons, or competition. They create their own rhythm and in doing so, threaten collective control. This type of individual does not react instinctively, they respond consciously. And it is from this maturity that the next step arises, the invitation to consciously subvert the norm, the courage to break the cycle without getting lost in it. At some point in the journey, the invitation the ego fears most arrives, the invitation to unlearn. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation requires the courage to defy everything believed to be normal. Subverting the norm isn't rebelling out of vanity, it's choosing to see the world through one's own eyes. It's stepping out of the queue of repetition and walking in step with consciousness. The person who accepts this call begins to question the truths that sustain the collective illusion. What is success? What is security? What is love? They discover that almost everything they pursue came from without, not within. And the spirituality of this gesture is immense, because every true revolution begins within. But conscious subversion requires a rare skill, discerning what is essence and what is conditioning. The ego revolts, the shadow reveals itself, and the self observes. It is a confusing, sometimes painful process, because the individual feels like they are falling apart, when in fact they are reorganizing themselves. They must learn to endure the gaze of others, the loneliness of transitions, and the discomfort of freedom. This subversion is not noisy, it is silent. It is not made of speeches, but of decisions. Decisions that seem small, like saying no to something that doesn't make sense, or choosing silence over explanation. Each of these is a symbolic break with the old self. The system interprets this as a threat, but in reality it is a liberation. The self-thinking individual threatens the cycle of emotional dependence and consumption that fuels the masses. They don't buy out of need. They don't engage in relationships out of fear. They don't work out of guilt. They create, they give, they serve, and they do all this without needing an audience. Jung called this posture shadow integration, the moment when the individual stops being controlled by unconscious forces and begins to dialogue with them. Subverting the pattern, therefore, isn't about destroying the world. It's about rebuilding it from consciousness. It's about remembering that real power lies not in those who shout, but in those who no longer need to convince. In practice, subverting the norm can mean choosing to pause in a world obsessed with movement. It can mean leaving social media to rediscover one's own silence. It can mean moving to a new city, changing professions, changing one's mind, not on impulse, but out of integrity. The important thing is to understand that each act of authenticity is a blow to the collective unconscious. Life begins to respond differently. Opportunities seem to appear out of nowhere. The right connections emerge, synchronicities multiply. But none of this is magic. It's coherence vibrating. It's the self rewarding the courage to be who one is. This conscious subversion, however, comes at a price, the initial loneliness of those who leave the familiar. But it is a fertile solitude, the womb of the new. It tests the individual's commitment to their own truth. Those who endure the silence of internal exile discover a kind of discipline the system will never understand, a strength born not of imposition, but of presence. And it is precisely this strength that sustains the next stage of the journey, the invisible discipline behind apparent inaction, the silent power of those who act without needing to be seen. The most common mistake is to confuse silence with laziness and pause with giving up. Carl Jung would say, there is a form of psychic work that the world doesn't see, the invisible labor of consciousness reorganizing itself. Invisible discipline is this force that manifests itself in calm, in the choice not to react, in the courage to wait for the right time. While the ego wants to act now, the self understands that true power lies in timing. It's the difference between what is rushed and what matures. The spiritually awakened person learns that inaction is also action when it arises from lucidity. They may appear immobile on the outside, but inside they are building castles of clarity, clearing beliefs, integrating shadows. And this is the highest form of productivity there is. The invisible discipline is that of the inner warrior. It is not one of physical effort, but of emotional self-mastery. It is the artist who continues practicing even without applause, the scholar who reads even without proof, the seeker who prays even without answers. It is the routine that no one applauds, but which sustains silent greatness. The ego seeks recognition. The self seeks coherence. Therefore, the man who practices this discipline is misunderstood. They say he is cold, detached, distant. But what others call distance is merely focus. He is not distracted by the noise of the world because he has learned to hear the subtle sound of his own soul. This discipline is also the art of renunciation, renouncing excess, immediacy, the need to prove. Jung said that what we resist persists, and the man who understands this stops fighting everything. He channels his energy. Instead of defending himself from the world, he begins to shape it. Instead of explaining himself, he observes. He is like the archer who holds the bow, waits for the wind, and only then shoots. He knows that force without direction is wasted, and apparent inaction is, in fact, preparation for the exact strike. This man is not slow. He is precise. He is not indecisive. He is strategic. He does not fear time. He works with it. In practice, this discipline translates into daily choices: going to bed early when no one is looking, studying when there's no urgency, breathing deeply instead of reacting, observing before responding. These are simple yet powerful gestures because they require self-mastery. And self-mastery is what separates the ordinary person from the conscious person. This discipline creates a magnetic presence, a stability that attracts what effort could never achieve. The ego seeks the result, the self seeks the state, and when the state is aligned, the result becomes inevitable. Therefore, the person disciplined in the invisible reaps the fruits of the visible without having to rush. And it is precisely from this serenity that the journey's final call arises. The inner impulse that comes not from ambition or haste, but from the soul. A call that transcends conformity and awakens in man the desire to live with purpose, not to impress, but to express. It is the final invitation to total coherence, when what one thinks, feels, and does become one. And it is about this inner call that transcends time and breaks the mask of normality that the next and final topic will reveal. There comes a moment when a person feels that something within them no longer fits the rhythm of the world. It's not laziness nor a crisis. It's the inner calling, that ancient voice that Carl Jung said was the expression of the self seeking a return to wholeness. This calling doesn't shout, it simply insists. It appears in the form of discomfort, boredom, and a lack of interest in what once seemed vital. It's the sign that the soul is trying to break out of the ego's shell. Conformity begins to hurt, and silence becomes more genuine than any conversation. At this point, spirituality ceases to be a concept and becomes urgent. People must rediscover themselves or be permanently lost. The calling doesn't demand haste. It demands surrender. But responding to this call is an act of almost sacred courage, because in hearing it, one must abandon not only what one has, but what one believes oneself to be. Jung said that the process of individuation is a kind of symbolic death. The ego dissolves to make room for reality. The world doesn't understand this movement and tries to dissuade the seeker. It offers distractions, promises, noise. But those who have heard the call know there is no turning back. They can even pretend for a while, but emptiness haunts them. Conformity, which once offered security, becomes a prison. And it is at this moment that they realize the greatest risk isn't changing, it's remaining. To answer the call is to embark on a path without a map. The soul provides no guarantee, only direction. The person who follows this impulse becomes a stranger to the eyes of the world, more introspective, more selective, more serene. It's as if something within him begins to observe everything from the outside, with a clarity that makes him free and at the same time isolated. But this isolation is the cocoon where metamorphosis occurs. He needs to separate himself from the noise to hear the whisper. Spirituality doesn't invite him to escape the world, but to see through it. And in seeing, he understands nothing needs to be fought, only transcended. In practice, following one's inner calling means making choices that make no sense to anyone else, and still continuing. It means changing course when everything seems stable. It means choosing integrity over convenience. It means preferring healing solitude to companionship that lulls you to sleep. It means living guided not by profit, but by coherence. The shadow still whispers, the ego still tries to negotiate, but the self directs. Life begins to align in strange, almost supernatural ways. The right people appear, unlikely doors open, coincidences cease to be coincidences, synchronicity becomes language, and man understands that he is not walking, he is being led. When he finally surrenders to this calling, something changes forever. Conformity is no longer comfortable, the fear of difference dissolves, and freedom ceases to be a beautiful concept and becomes a state of being. He discovers that what he called ambition was actually self-longing, the soul's impulse trying to remind him of who he is. And this recognition is true awakening, when the self, the ego, and the shadow finally dance to the same rhythm. There is no more escape, no more seeking, only presence. And it is from this point onward that the entire previous journey takes on meaning. The man who refused to pretend finally becomes whole. In the end, the world does not punish the man who errs, it punishes the man who awakens. Society forgives disguise, but fears the truth. That's why, when you begin to act consciously, many turn away, and that's okay. Carl Jung said that the price of individuation is temporary solitude, but the reward is eternal freedom. The person who refuses to pretend is not rebellious, but lucid. They stop obeying the rules of fear and begin to respond to the laws of the soul. Now the question is, will you continue playing the role the world has written for you, or will you start writing your own script? Are you going to continue to confuse security with imprisonment, or will you finally choose the integrity that you release, even if it hurts? Everything you sought outside was always inside, waiting for the moment you stopped acting. When that moment arrives, life changes tone. Conversations gain weight, silence gains voice, and presence becomes your greatest spiritual weapon. And at that point, there is no turning back. You stop being a part of the system and become the author of the reality you inhabit. If something inside you has awakened, don't ignore it. Comment on what this video made you realize. Sometimes the comment is the first step on the journey. And if you want to continue expanding this awareness, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every word is a mirror, and every reflection, an invitation back to yourself.